All right. Good afternoon. As you all know, at 1 p.m., there will be a press briefing in this room by Sergei Lavrov, the Foreign Minister of the Russian Federation. And as a reminder, the briefing will be in person only. There'll be no online questions, but you will, of course, be able to follow it via the UN Web TV platform. At 2:45, Mohanad Hadi, the humanitarian coordinator for the occupied Palestinian territory, who is here in New York, will be at the Security Council stakeout to answer some of your questions. Tomorrow, as our guest, we will have Maryse Guimont, who is the UN Women representative in the occupied Palestinian territory. She'll be joining us virtually from Jerusalem to speak on the situation in Gaza. As you all saw this morning, the chef de cabinet, Courteney Rattray, delivered remarks on behalf of the Secretary General at today's Security Council meeting on the situation in the Middle East. In the remarks, he asserted that nothing can justify the horrific attacks of terror committed by Hamas and other armed groups in Israel on 7 October, and nothing can justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. The Secretary General noted that the high death toll in Gaza, adding that almost 2 million people have now been displaced. That's nearly the entire population of Gaza, and many of those people have been displaced multiple times, as we've been telling you. Nowhere in Gaza is safe, he reasserted. In the remarks, the Secretary General also warned that recent developments are driving a stake through the heart of any prospect for a two-state solution. The geography of the occupied West Bank is steadily being altered through Israeli administrative and legal steps. The chef de cabinet, on the Secretary General's behalf, also reiterated our call for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire and the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, and his push for intensified efforts to increase humanitarian aid delivery. International support for these efforts is critical, particularly for the essential work of UNRWA, it was added. Turning to the situation on the ground, our humanitarian colleagues report that Israeli military has stopped all aid missions going from north of Wadi Gaza today. This means that humanitarian workers were unable to reach any of the hundreds of thousands of people in need. It also made it impossible for them to collect supplies from northern entry points of Erez West, where a lot of the supplies are coming into Gaza. OCHA has received multiple reports of military activity along the Israeli military road that separates the north and the south of Gaza. Meanwhile, OCHA has seen large numbers of displaced people crossing from Gaza City into Deir al-Balah Governorate, at least 450 people today compared to just over 1,000 the week prior. Some of those new arrivals told aid workers that Israeli troops had shot at people trying to cross, forcing them to turn around. OCHA has not been able to OCHA has not been able to independently verify these reports, but as we have said repeatedly, civilians in Gaza must be protected and their essential needs must be met wherever they are. The head of UNRWA said that at least 8 schools in Gaza have been hit in the last 10 days. In a social media post on X, Philippe Lazzarini stressed that schools are not a target and must never be used for fighting or any military purposes by any party in this conflict. UNRWA said that nearly 70% of the agency's school buildings have been hit since the war began. Over 95% of these facilities, these school facilities, were being used as shelters when they were hit. Almost 540 people sheltering in UNRWA facilities have been killed since 7th of October. The World Food Program, for its part, says that it has been forced to further reduce rations in Gaza City to ensure broader coverage for people who have been newly displaced. In July, WFP provided some 600,000 people in Gaza with food assistance and over 500,000 people with food parcels or wheat flour for their consumption. For its part, the World Health Organization says that as of today, just 15 of Gaza's 36 hospitals are just partially functioning, and just 1,500 of the usual 3,500 hospital beds in Gaza are currently available. And on the 10th anniversary of the tragic downing of the Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 over eastern Ukraine, the Secretary General recalls in a statement with sadness the 298 victims that lost their lives on that day. In full solidarity with the families of the victims and in honor of their memory, the Secretary General renews his call on all states to extend their full cooperation pursuant to Security Council Resolution 2166 that was adopted back in 2014. And that resolution calls to ensure that those responsible are held to account following the important work of the Joint Investigation Team. And high-level representatives from more than 40 UN and Arab League state agencies, funds, and programs are meeting in Geneva to discuss issues of common concern in the Arab region, including in the political, the economic, and the social spheres. In the opening session, Khaled Kiari, our Assistant Secretary General for the Middle East, Asia, and the Pacific in the Department of Political and Peace Building Affairs, stressed that the importance of multilateralism and international cooperation in overcoming the wide range of challenges facing the world and the Arab region in particular. The meeting will continue until 19 July. And from Haiti, a UN Women report shows that 300,000 displaced women and girls face alarming living conditions. The agency's rapid gender assessment shows how makeshift camps lack in basic human necessities and put women and girls particularly at risk of sexual and gender-based violence. The survey was conducted in the 6 most populated sites hosting displaced people in Port-au-Prince. It shows that most camps have no lighting or locks in essential areas like bedrooms and toilets. The constant danger of stray bullets and other security risks underscores the urgent need for improved protection in the camps. UN Women says it is urgent to guarantee the active participation of women and girls in decision-making within camps and to put in place immediate protection measures for them as they face risk to their security every day. More information is available online. And turning to Libya, our UN political mission there congratulated the High National Election Commission on completing the first phase of voter registration for 60 municipalities across the country. Despite challenging circumstances, 210,545 Libyan citizens have registered to vote in the forthcoming municipal elections. The mission commends people who registered to vote and demonstrated their commitment to choosing their local leaders. It encouraged all registrants to verify accuracy in their names and information. UNSMIL also urged Libyan authorities to provide the necessary resources to facilitate the next steps in the municipal electoral process. It encourages the Election Commission and other Libyan institutions to persist in their efforts to encourage women's participation in the elections. And from South Sudan, our peacekeeping mission there released its latest quarterly reports on human rights, which shows that attacks against civilians driven primarily by subnational armed violence involving community-based militias and other civil defense groups is continuing. Between January and March, the mission documented 240 incidents of violence impacting 913 civilians nationwide. These incidents range between killing, injuring, abduction, conflict-related sexual violence. This represents a 24% increase in the number of violent incidents compared to the same period last year. Nicholas Haysom, the head of the peacekeeping mission, called for collective action by authorities and communities to resolve long-standing grievances and stressed that respect for human rights is fundamental for building sustained peace. Finally, money. Fresh payment in the regular budget. Of the 332 islands and 522 smaller islets making up this archipelago of the archipelago of this nation, only 106 of those islands or islets are actually inhabited. Where are we? No. Okay, Philippines, Micronesia. No, this is a country in Melanesia, to be precise. Where should we all be today?
Bali.
Fiji. Oh, so we thank, I'm happy to go to Bali, but Fiji paid. So we thank our friends in Suva. We are now up to 122 member states who have sent in a suitcase full of cash. Edie.
Thank you, Steph. I just wanted to clarify something. Is the reason that no aid moved north of Wadi Gaza the reported military activity? Is that why?
Well, I mean, we're, my understanding is when the crossings are closed, the checkpoints are closed, we're not really given an explanation. At the same time, we have seen reports of military activity, so I think that's the deduction, but it's not as if we're given
So the crossing was closed by the Israelis?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Can you also tell us what's getting out of the port of Ashdod? Is anything getting out of there?
Yes, there are some materials that are coming in through the Cyprus maritime corridors, and the aid collection, through the mechanism that Sigrid Kaag and her team have put together, and that includes shipments through Ashdod, and then that go in to Gaza, mostly through Eretz West. But I will try to get you exactly what is coming in.
And any update on what's coming in from Kerem Shalom?
No, not. I mean, just the update that I did get is that since the beginning of July, we and our partners have been able to collect more than 1,300 truckloads of supplies from all of the entry ports into Gaza combined. Those are mostly food items. Erez West accounts for the largest proportion of commodities. That was followed by the floating dock, then Kerem Shalom, and then the crossing, so-called Gate 96. It's a slight improvement over June, which was about 1,090 truckloads, but it's well below what we need. Pam, then Gabriel.
There are reports today that Israel is setting up a floating port in the same location.
That I have not seen.
And in terms of the port itself, you've given a lot of briefings on this, but
The port?
I mean the floating
Dock,
port.
yeah.
Is the floating port still physically there? And what some of the goods were left on the dock and then abandoned for a
Okay,
while,
so
and then some
I
people
can't,
took it?
what the status of the floating dock is a question for the United States, because it's their dock, it's not
But
ours. So
it's still there.
I can't speak to
Okay.
whether it's there or not there. We, for the UN system, directly has not picked up goods from there for quite some time. Over the last, I think last week and into the weekend, if I'm not mistaken, our colleagues on the ground had hired private contractors to pick up what was destined for the UN from that holding area, because we have a security concern for our staff, but we also have a huge concern that all this effort to bring this aid in, and that we don't want that aid to go to waste. So that was picked up through private contractors and sent to the warehouse in Deir el-Bala, and then for further distribution.
And I'm sorry,
Your microphone, please. Sorry.
Just clarification, private contractors hired by the UN to bring it to the...
Yes,
okay,
exactly.
thank you.
Exactly. Gabriel, and then Deji.
Thank you, Steph. Yesterday, the spokesperson for the Prime Minister's Office of Israel.
Pam, please.
Yesterday, the spokesperson for the Prime Minister's Office of Israel had his daily briefing, and in that he made special remarks about Philippe Lazzarini and UNRWA. Among them, and I want your response, he says that the Israeli forces have retrieved, in his words, millions of documents showing that UNRWA employees were involved in October 7th. Have you received any, has the Secretary General received any of these millions of documents?
No, I mean, that's not all that he said, right? And I think we've seen since the beginning, since October 7th and even before, but really since October 7th, UNRWA being the target of a number of attacks, both figuratively and literally, right? We just talked about the attacks on premises. The remarks made last night, especially those focused on Mr. Lazzarini personally, made by David Menser, are unacceptable, to say the least. I think that using the kind of inflammatory language he used to describe Mr. Lazzarini, and I don't want to repeat them, but they're there for the record, in an environment that's already extremely volatile, is reprehensible and downright dangerous, because it puts at risk a senior UN officials whose only focus is on helping civilians in Gaza and to alleviate their suffering. And of course, an individual like Mr. Lazzarini, who has been very clear in his, and very vocal in denouncing the terror attacks by Hamas on October 7th. Moreover, and I think more to the issue of the documents, UNRWA's management has been very clear. They've been fully transparent in their operations and willing to cooperate with the Israeli authorities regarding allegations of infiltration by the agency. As you saw, and as you well know, there have been a number of efforts on behalf of the UN, and as you also recall, UNRWA were the first ones to announce the list of staff that had been potentially involved in the 7th of October. There was a report by the former French Foreign Minister, Catherine Colonna, whose recommendations are already being implemented, plus the ongoing OIOS report, which I've mentioned a few times, which we expect to have an update before the end of the month.
He said he said specifically that evidence has been given to the Secretary General. Is that correct?
I can tell you there have not been 1 million documents handed over to the Secretary General. Whatever information is handed over to us, we looked at. There was a letter regarding, I think, had about 100 names. That letter was sent, was dispatched immediately by the Secretary General to OIOS, and they're looking at that information.
Last follow-up on this is, you didn't want to repeat what he said. I'll do it for you. He said that Felipe Lazzarini, he said Felipe Lazzarini is he's a terrorist sympathizer, a Jew-killing enabler, and a liar.
As I said, it's reprehensible, and it frankly puts Philippe at risk. Deji.
Well, let me first go back to the floating dock. You said the UN doesn't know the peer. We should ask US about this. But as I understand, there are aids that left on the beach still need to be delivered. Is that correct?
My understanding is what my colleagues who actually know have told me is that all the aid that was labeled for pickup by the UN has now been picked up over a period of a number of days by these private contractors to ensure that it would not go to waste.
Okay, so for UN, there's no left.
That is
okay.
my understanding.
So then I have this question. You said the assessment of the security issue is still continuing. Is that still going on? I mean, is there any meaning to do that?
We are constantly reviewing the security operations of our staff and the security situation of our operations and our staff.
Okay, one last question. Today, the Israeli ambassador in the Security Council, I think he shifted the attention to Iran. He said that Iran is the root cause of all the wars that's had now currently in that region. Does the UN agree with that?
We were invited to speak at this meeting. The Secretary General's statement delivered by our chef de cabinet is our statement to the meeting. It's not for me to analyze or comment on statements made in the council. Sorry, Abdelhamid, and then Sarife, and then Ibtisam.
Thank you, Stéphane. Haaretz disclosed, I think 2 days ago, maybe you were asked this question, of keeping 1,100 bodies of Palestinians in the Israeli Guantanamo, which is daytime detention center. What do you say to that?
Keeping, I'm sorry, I didn't understand, keeping what?
1,100 bodies, corpse
Okay.
of Palestinians.
I mean, the issue, you know, in this conflict, the issue of not returning corpses to the families is one that has been ongoing, and we've always called for the families to be able to receive the bodies of their loved ones.
So the news coming from Israel is that there are 21,000 Palestinians detained and imprisoned, and 1,100 corpses still kept. And yet Israel acts as if it's a civilized country that abides by international law. Why Israel has to be treated as such?
It's not a question for me to answer. There are 193 member states in this organization. They all have the same rights and they all have the same responsibilities vis-a-vis the commitments they have signed on to, either through the Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and other international documents. And when those countries violate them, it should be clear to all. Sirife then Ibtisam.
Thank you, Stéphane. I want to ask you about the recent Israeli attack on the Turkish Palestinian Friendship Hospital. It is reported that it's the only center providing cancer treatment to patients in Gaza. And following the attack, there's also a photo of a bunch of Israeli soldiers posing in front of the Turkish Palestinian Friendship Hospital. Well, it's not the first time that Israeli soldiers are posing in front of civilian infrastructures that they have attacked or at times destroyed. What is your reaction to this?
Well, I mean, as we've pointed out what the World Health Organization has said, which is decried the continuing attacks on healthcare facilities, on hospitals, and that there is no way should any of these hospitals be the site of combat.
I have a follow-up in the posing. How do you evaluate that?
I
As if
haven't
it's
seen
like
those
a-
pictures, but I think all those types of pictures are very shocking.
Just one more question.
Yep.
Today, during the UN Security Council meeting this morning, there were protesters in the room before Mr. Lavrov spoke. Do you have any information as to who they were or how they got into
Yeah,
the
they
UN
were.
Security Council?
They had been. They were guests of a delegation. They put up signs. They were asked to leave. They left. There was no. Let me finish. No. It was done in a civilized manner. They were asked to, they put up their signs, which was against, and they shouted a number of things, which is against the rules of the Security Council. Security officers kindly asked them to leave, and they left. Ibtisam.
First, quick follow-up regarding Gabriel's question on Mr. Lazzarini. I mean, you talked a little bit about it, but could you elaborate about how worried are you about the security of Mr. Lazzarini and whether you are taking some extra measures to protect him? And what about other UN officials who are, UNRWA specifically, who are in Jerusalem
I mean,
and
listen,
their safety?
we will, as it will not surprise you, Ibtisam, we're not going to comment on specific security measures, but we've seen in the last weeks attacks against UN facilities in Jerusalem, notably a fire that was a small brush fire that was started outside one of our facilities, chants of civilians calling for the building to be burnt down. This is all extremely worrying, and the authorities in Israel have a responsibility to ensure the safety of all UN premises. But I think that's why I mean the rhetoric that was used yesterday, we hope doesn't inflame an already volatile situation even more.
And I have a follow-up on the remarks of the chef du cabinet today at the Security Council, just to try to clarify it. When he talked about the numbers of killed and injured in Israel and in Gaza and in Palestine, on the Israeli side, he talked about 1,500 people who were killed since October 7th. Does that include, because the numbers during the October 7th were around, I think, if I'm not mistaken, around 1,200. So these additional 300 that you included in your report, does that include Israeli soldiers, or what? Where is this about more than 300?
It's a roundup of numbers. I'll get you a bit more detail on that.
Okay, thank you.
Pam?
Thanks, Steph. One clarification to the last question about the protesters. You said a delegation? What delegation were they?
My understanding, they were signed in by the Israeli delegation.
Okay, and my regular question is, you've said a few things about it, and so pardon the repeat, but who at the UN will be attending the Olympics? Is there any role of anyone? In
No one
Paris?
from the UN, as far as I know, will be competing. Though if one of my colleagues is competing, I apologize, and I wish them luck. We will announce that. We'll announce the UN representation shortly. You may follow up if
Thank
some.
you. In other Olympics games, you had actually refugee.
Yeah, I mean there is a refugee team which is organized by the International Olympic Committee in cooperation with UNHCR, but I do not believe those are staff members. Though we do have staff members who have been refugees at one point or another. On that note, I will leave you to wait 21 minutes for Mr. Lavrov.